Hi, I'm Arthur. This is a compilation video of a 10-part miniseries I did for members only over the last, yearish. It's about Imperial Guard, if you like that. I'm basically going to be cutting out a few elements and then making all of these videos public in this big compilation video because I know you guys like to sleep to my voice sometimes, which is weird. But regardless, the series is covering a bunch of obscure and fun Guardsmen regiments and is more or less just going to be all whole stuff you guys haven't seen, though cutting out the fat. If you want to see these videos before anyone else does, sometimes a year in advance, then become a channel member of an Arthur Lord. It helps out the channel, helps out my editor, helps me keep this whole well-oiled machine going, and then we get to have fun. So, yeah. Either way, I hope you like Guardsmen, because I won't waste your time any further. Though, before we get into it, 11th edition is here, and I think I have a sponsor that we all know and love, and they're also a good friend of the channel, Tabletop Stronghold. 11th edition is here, fellas, and you know what that means. If you collect Space Marines like me, you're gonna have to have some storage space set aside for more dudes, which I will accept happily, as I do want a chaplain with a jump pack. Yum, 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 gimme, gimme, gimme. Showed here is my Display XL case that I use. It's the MagCase XL 2.0, and it has all of my currently painted Space Marines, because I'm going to be conducting a crusade campaign at my house with my friends, and I'm just genuinely excited to get them off the ground because they've just been collecting dust. But due to this case, I can just show them off and have easy access to them whenever I have a game coming up. And with it being 11th edition finally, and you're in the midst of the Independence Day sales on Tabletop Stronghold, now is the best time ever to hop in. With sales ranging as high as 35% off, you really should capitalize on this. But don't worry, if you miss out, as of the 5th of July, you can still use my code BONES25 for 25% off, just in case you miss the sale. It would help out Tabletop Stronghold and me, and also you, because it's a very useful case to have, and it allows you to play more of this awesome game. So special thanks to Tabletop Stronghold as per the usual, and let's get into the Guardsman video proper. After going through a lot of the suggestions I had asked for in that one video, I realized that this is probably the best one that I want to do. I do kind of want to do one-off videos talking about obscure topics from time to time, but one thing people talked about a lot was me covering their favorite guard regiments. So I took a few from the list and a few from friends, and here we are, talking about one of my favorites, the Maccabian Janissaries. They are quite literally one of the coolest guard factions in the setting, bar none. I would even go as far to say that they're basically just the cooler version of the Krieg. They are essentially the same thing, but with a lot more interesting shit going on for them, in my opinion, and basically they just have a very similar aesthetic and way of going about war, but I just find they handle it better. So who are the Maccabian Janissaries, and why do I keep thinking that Janissaries in my script has two fucking ends? Basically, a long ass time ago, a man with a great talent for violence by the name of Drusus rallied a massive army in the Imperium to cut into the Halo Stars. Now, if you don't know much about the Halo Stars, they are something that does not like to be cut into, with innumerable Xenos horrors that would make even the most staunch of Chaos Forces feel a bit unnerved if ever they were to directly interact with it. Like, for context, the Ghoul Stars, one of the most eldritch horror parts of the 40k setting, are in the Halo Stars, albeit I should note that, a lot of the Halo Stars are actually habitable, at least marginally so, but I digress. I'm getting a bit off topic here. So, a man named Drusus was going to take the light of the Emperor to the Halo Stars and carve out a kingdom for humanity, fighting aliens, chaos, and damn near everything he could. The man was a legendary general, but was not immune to death, as due to the efforts of a particularly talented assassin of the enemy forces, Drusus was slain. But here's the fun part. Apparently, the light of the Emperor filled him and reduced the would-be assassin to a pile of religiously confused ash on the ground. This also led to Drusus being resurrected and even further invigorated to do more for humanity, literally being filled with the light of his god and all that. His efforts would lead to the foundations of what would become the Calexis sector being birthed into reality, and that is an important sector of space, but a topic for another time. We must focus on the weirder section of the Calexis sector, because that is just a massive space to cut whatever. The thing that we're going to be focusing on, of course, is Maccabius Quintus. Basically, the planet where the now venerated Saint Drusus was killed and then resurrected, now being considered a holy figure, and the planet itself being considered a very important part for pilgrimage for people that are in the Calexis sector. And the world of Maccabius Quintus also has a rank of soldier that has appeared in the last couple thousand years, the Maccabian Janissaries, raised from the ranks of an individual in the planetary defense force that has shown a great deal of aptitude towards all angles of warfare, as well as religious zealotry. The Janissaries are some of the best troopers in the Guard, being essentially a religiously motivated zealot specializing in frontline tactics and working in groups, as well as trying their best, each and every one of them, to be essentially a one-man army. They're equipped with enough kit to make most Guardsmen feel like they are a one-man army in general, you know, having enough rations to survive a couple days in the middle of goddamn nowhere. But the thing that you're going to notice is the most striking about them is that they are wearing the silver death mask that resembles Saint Drusus into battle. The Maccabian Janissaries are literally just the same thing as the Krieg. I'm not joking. They never go home once deployed off-world and actively attempt to die a martyr's death when in the field. They work as hard as they can to die in the name of Saint Drusus and to further the cause of the Emperor. It's basically the same thing as the Krieg, even obscuring their faces with the mask of the saint instead of a gas mask. But I think the Maccabian Janissaries do it better just because there's a lot more of an interesting story behind it, and they're not just vat-grown try-hard clones who are constantly, I should note, putting the lives of other regiments in danger if they have to work with them. The Maccabian Janissaries, on the other hand, actually have a history of being credible leaders and boosting the morale of the more faithful ranks of the Guard around them, being able to lead even from the front lines instead of executing people who complained about getting shot in the ankle at one point. Yeah, I'm still kind of on the Krieg hate train. This shit never stops, but whatever. The Maccabian Janissaries have taken part in so many different campaigns in order to stop some of the most horrendous acts of heresy in the setting of 40k. Good example, you guys ever hear of the Severan Dominate? Yeah, nah, me neither. A lot of people don't ever really talk about the stuff that happens in the Calexis sector, because if I remember correctly, it's the main sector that the tabletop RPG takes place in, but yeah, it's an incredibly fleshed out setting, but there's so many books to go through to understand it. Regardless, basically, essentially, there was this rather uncouth individual by the name of Duke Severan VIII of Kulth. Bit of a mouthful. This man was appointed Duke of the region, and through many means one might refer to as radically fucking illegal, he was able to expand his influence far and above where he was supposed to stay. Assassinations, falsifying documents, planting witnesses, and even going as far to make deals with the fucking Dark Eldar to lend them planets under his jurisdiction for torture slaves in order to gain their favor. Duke Severan was planning something particularly wicked. He was planning on gathering enough resources in order to secede from the Imperium, and unfortunately for him, he got so close. But that's when some random orc wah appeared, as they tend to do in these situations, and whoopsie pupsie, he did not have the resources to fight back against them, or at least the resources to spare. He called to the Imperium for help, thinking that they wouldn't investigate him as much, and, well, what happens when you bring a bunch of unwanted eyes into a very suspicious situation? Well, they start to look at the most suspicious parts. So they ended up finding out pretty quickly about the Dark Eldar raids, and it basically forced the hand of Duke Severus to secede from the Imperium a significant period sooner than he really wanted to or expected to, and it ended up with him creating this autonomous secessionist group known as the Severan Dominate, and they're actually one of the major forces in the Calexis sector. So, needless to say, betraying the Emperor, betraying the Calexis Center, being a coward, also spitting on the holy ground nearest to Maccabius Quintus. Yeah, the Janissaries took exception to that and were instrumental in taking down this regretful crackpot. But I will save the full story of the Severan Dominate for another time, as this is kind of where the Maccabian Janissaries story ends. You know what one of my most specialist regiments to love in the whole setting is? Yeah, that was a clustered fuck of English, but whatever, but you get what I mean. Yeah, it's the Penal Legions. Yeah, they are an idea that is pretty common on the worlds of the Imperium, using hardened criminals to fight their wars, usually used as meat shields so that the real guardsmen behind them can get into better positions and not have to worry about taking a bullet every inch they take. Penal Legion soldiers are often given a deal. Go on these likely to end your life level missions, and if you survive the campaign, you get an official Imperial pardon and can go back to a relatively normal life or just become a proper member of the Guard. Which, well, most don't end up surviving. That being said, we aren't just talking about the regular Penal Legions, we are talking about something a bit more interesting. We are talking about specifically the 13th Penal Legion, aka Colonel Schaefer's Last Chancers. These individuals are pretty legendary in the history of 40k, and their old models, chef's kiss. Absolutely super flavorful. Though, I also have to state, in general, I've been getting pretty hard into non-GW war and skirmish games, and the sculpts that they use oftentimes are just reminiscent of what old GW models were. I'm getting off track here. Me enjoying Argatoria aside, let's talk about the Last Chancers here. Colonel Schaefer is a bit of a mythical man, up there with Yarrick in terms of his ability to get shit done. He's apparently one of the most strict and gifted commanders of prisoners, specifically in the entire Imperium, which leads to him having a weirdly high success rate of campaigns. But unfortunately, because of the numbers he's putting in, he's often assigned to campaigns that are not exactly standard. He's usually forced to put his men on the task of accomplishing things that would seem borderline impossible for most Space Marine regiments, but what do I know? He tends to get shit done. Basically, almost all of his encounters are Armageddon war level shit, but what makes him so special to be given these tasks? Does he have any special selection methods that make him much more potent than others? Does he take the best of the best of the best? Sort of. Basically, his recruitment method is to take the hundreds or even thousands of the most hated and dangerous criminals in the Imperium, throw them with a little bit of extra training into a war with a normal Penal Legion group, and after they go through one campaign, from the remaining dozen or so that are left after the slaughter, he usually recruits them as special agents for the Last Chancers, who are then moved to a special Penal Regiment training colony to then undergo some of the strictest military training there is to be had in 40k. These individuals are the meanest of the mean and the hardest of the hard at this point, but to hammer home just how fucked up this whole situation is, they are then sent on missions that most Kasserkin would be a little bit nervous to attend. Do they survive? Yeah, sometimes, which is kind of crazy to think about, which is also a testament to how top class Colonel Schaefer is as a commander, that he is able to command a ragtag group of literal criminals and turn them into a semi-elite fighting force to rival some of the Imperium's elite soldiers. Are they super soldiers? No. Are they able to take down a Space Marine in single combat? Probably not. I mean, they'd probably have to work in some pretty cheaty bullshit tactics for it to work, but no. The thing here is they still also have the usual Penal Legion laws, where if they succeed in their campaigns, they're granted their freedom, but there's also a single rule here. That is, if ever they commit a crime again and are arrested, you have to serve in the Penal Legion again, but this time permanently. This has led to a rotating door of characters leaving and coming back because Schaefer, he's a wise old goat and knows that the people he collects for his regiment are violent. Probably some of the most violent you could ever get. Their main skill is violence, and in the end, all they will ever be is violent. So, he keeps a really close eye on anyone who leaves his regiment because he knows at some point, most, if not all, are going to slip up and end up back here. So because of that, that's what the specialty is of the Last Chancers. They're kind of in a weird way functioning similar to that of Dark Age era Dark Angels. They aren't so much generalists who are trained to be the best guardsmen. They're actually more of a box of tools that has a super specialized skill set depending on whatever crime they have. Like, need to open an advanced technological lock? Yeah, the non-tech priest hacker criminal who got arrested for extreme tech heresy may have something to say about that. Need to snipe someone from from miles away. The literal ex-death cult assassin has a good response for that. Need to force your way through a crowd of heretics? Well, the 8-foot-tall Ogren, who you promised to enact his favorite puppet show if he kills over 40 Chaos Cultists today, will likely be able to help with that, especially if you offer him ice cream afterwards. But aside from you bribing an Ogren with what is ostensibly 40k's equivalent to Cocoa Melon, that's a sentence that I didn't expect to exist up until now, but I don't think anybody else has said that, so yeah, take that to your grave. The 13th Penal Legion and the Penal Legions in general are pretty potent at what they do. They are the unwashed masses of criminals being sent in to do what needs to be done, usually be meat shields, but you never really should underestimate the importance of having just a lot of bodies on the fields. Fun fact, in the Horus Heresy, it's very often stated that the biggest weakness of a Space Marine is thousands of people who do not have a regard for their own safety and do everything they can, even if it means their painful deaths, to kill a Space Marine. It's why the Word Bearers were such a difficult legion to deal with, because massive hordes of cultists that would charge Space Marines would just bog them down with bodies so that a single blow to a soft seal, or even if there was a greater Word Bearer nearby with a power weapon, could just go in, stab them in the brain, and then move on. So having these kinds of guys as Penal Legion operators actually does make a lot of sense, because yeah, no, they totally could take down a Space Marine in the right circumstances just because of how they work, and they're working to, gain their freedom. And one of the most interesting facts about the Penal Legions is if they fail in their duty, or at least die in the service of, working for the Penal Legions, they're actually given redemption. They are pardoned of all crimes post-death, which allows them to kind of live on with a degree of redemption to them, or, get torn apart by demons in the afterlife, because, the warp is kind of weird, but whatever. But having access to the Penal Legions, and especially shit like Schaefer's/Chancers, is kind of cool. But, yeah. You let me know what you guys think. I personally think that Colonel Schaefer's Last Chancers should get a box of miniatures the same way that the Tanith First and Only did. It could be kind of cool to have that as a unit, or just bring them back as an option. Hell, bring back other regiments of guys that aren't just, one unit, or the Krieg. I'm still salty about that, but I'm getting off track a bit too much in this video. So today we are continuing my Infinite Parts series, where I am going to slander the living fuck out of the Krieg, because I find as I grow older, the less I like them, which is bullshit, and I hate it, and I think it's lame that they are now considered one of the more popular regiments when they are so not as deserving as others. They do deserve some spotlight, but I feel like being pushed is kind of making them a little bit overhyped. They're kind of just the Roman Reigns of guard regiments, but I don't know, none of you watch wrestling, so who cares? Even though they are one of the original regiments, okay, this is a bit of a brief aside now. Before I continue to talk about who we're talking about today, I'm recording this, and about 4 times I've had to restart this video just because my brain is constantly trying to say something like Legion or Chapter instead of Regiment or Squad in regards to the Guardsmen, which is disappointing. I think I talk about Space Marines too much. Anyhow, the Steel Legion, if memory serves me correctly, was one of the early regiments to be brought into the game of 40k, like above the setting. They were brought in as a purchasable miniature or something that was just a repaint of the Krieg set, because weirdly enough the Krieg came before them. I didn't know that until recently. I do think that the Steel Legion are one of the best Legion and playing regiments in the game. Now, why is that? How could they be so different? And I'll answer that question with another question. You ever play Twisted Metal? You ever watch an edit of a Need for Speed Underground or Hot Pursuit game set to 9 Thou by Styles of Beyond? The answer, if you're watching this video and have purchased the membership, should probably be yes automatically, or wait, how old are you exactly? To which, if you said that second thing, my only response is, fuck you, I just had my birthday and I don't need to deal with this bullshit right If you did agree with that, then you have to admit the idea of spamming a bunch of lunatics with no regard for their own safety in a bunch of cheap transports to blast enemy orcs to pieces with high volumes of laser fire is pretty damn cool. The Armageddon Steel Legion are a regiment from the world of Armageddon. But, fun fact, which I actually didn't know until recently, I feel like I just forgot it, and maybe I'm just being reminded of it now, because, I've memory issues from brain damage, I guess. But Armageddon was actually originally Ulanor, which was the site of one of the most important battles with orcs in the history of pre-heresy era Imperium. And the reason why Horus got crowned as the War Master was because of his efforts during that war. But besides that, it is a smog-coated manufactory world that is known for 4 things. One, and the most important one, it is a manufactory world that produces the mass majority of the Imperium's Chimera transports, or at least it has the highest production output of the highest quality ones. Thus why the Armageddon Steel Legion are known as the Steel Legion, but we'll get to that a little bit later. 2, the place is super polluted and barely able to support life, so the majority of its population are trained to use gas masks from an early age or die of some kind of rust, lung, esoteric cancer disease. 3, the gangs that occupy the hives on this planet are where they kind of recruit their regiments early because they teach kids, probably as young as 5, to shoot guns and sell heroin in the gangs there. But those kids are also the ones who get recruited, so we don't judge. And lastly, the thing that most people know about is that whenever Armageddon is brought up, it is usually referred to by the blank war for Armageddon, because by God, this place is fought over a lot. Mostly by orcs. It's almost like Ulanor was a bit of a sore spot for them, but whatever. We are on the 4th war for Armageddon right now, and by God, it keeps getting bloodier every goddamn time. Sorta. See, the first war for Armageddon we don't actually talk about because it was Khorne, and that got censored by the Inquisition for inquisitorial reasons, which also, fun fact, I'm pretty sure that was the war that led to the Months of Shame, so get fucked Grey Knights again, like usual, but whatever. But yeah, that was probably bloodier because it was Khorne demons, but, mind the pun there. Regardless, the Steel Legion is a fighting force of people who do their job to the best of their ability and have a wide range of heavy-hitting tactics. But the one they are most known for is the mass deployment of tanks, particularly Chimera troop transports, which each squad is carried into battle in. This allows for rapid deployment and, in a weird way, to decrease their casualties in large-scale war because there's a lot more armor between them and the enemy than there would be a foot-slogging troop regiment. Though, also, due to this being a manufactory world, the Steel Legion tends to actually have some of the best quality of gear the Guard can usually get. It's actually a symbol of rank in the Chem dogs if you have a gas mask from Armageddon, because it works so much better than any other gas mask in the setting. Also, apparently their las weapons are pretty top-notch as well, but don't think that just because these fellas get the shiniest toys, that's why they're as accomplished as they are. No. They actually have some of the hardiest and strong-willed guardsmen in the setting, being able to accomplish goals and tasks the likes of which most guardsmen wouldn't be able to. Like, imagine the breaking of Cadia. Imagine that level of conflict, but with orcs. Now, imagine that 3 times in a row, but imagine the Guard actually won each time with the aid of Space Marines instead of, having their planet blow up and the universe getting ruined. Well, okay, maybe, because I know that the 4th war for Armageddon is still going on, and we don't know how that's going to shake down if memory serves me correctly, and the Khorne conflict was weird, but their training and resilience to fear as well as conflict has made them incredible soldiers who work well with other regiments or even chapters of Space Marines. Let's not forget that Commissar Yarrick originally fought with them in the 2nd and 3rd wars for Armageddon and is considered one of the best heroes the Imperium had, which sucks that I had to say had because he's no longer with us, but I also kind of follow Crackduck's mentality of just lying to myself that he's still alive because he's still alive. He's immortal. He cannot die, and he's one of the coolest characters for a goddamn reason. But yeah, the Armageddon Steel Legion are often deployed in other areas on scant few occasions due to them usually being needed to defend Armageddon, but when they go to certain places, they're usually brought there because of their expertise in killing greenskins and orcs and anything that dares show up to Armageddon, which, surprisingly, these guys are actually very accomplished at killing orcs. Speaking of, the Armageddon Orc Hunters. Fucking amazing? Literally just a bunch of Catachan jungle fighters, but on Armageddon and hunting down orcs with knives the size of swords. I mean, I do have to read about the Calexis sector about 1,000 times over at this point to understand some of these. So with that being said, the Bronteian long knives. I really like them. They are very especially fun as a regiment, and that's not because I secretly have a thing for knife play. It's actually because I really like melee infantry, and also have a public thing for knife play. But regardless of me disgusting half of you at the start of the Bronteian long knives video, they are a very hyper-specialized variant of guardsmen who have a specific reputation that if you can read or have ears, and you could probably tell by the name, you can kind of, figure out what it is. It's not really a secret. I mean, I guess it could be funny if I was like, oh yeah, the long knives are actually known for their tactics using las cannons, but no, they are a melee frontline charging regiment of individuals who collect swords like your edgy friend in high school who never grew out of his knife phase. Hi. That's me. The Bronteian long knives hail from the planet of Bront, which was awarded to them due to their service in acquiring a safe spot for the Imperium amongst the Calexis sector. The planet itself is actually relatively stable and nice for once, so I don't have to use the word shithole in one of these videos to describe the planet, which is, kind of uncommon. It's also slowly being converted into a true and blue hive world, so the environment's gonna probably go to shit soon, but, right now it's relatively okay. The most interesting part about the world of Bront and the culture of the Bronteian long knives is even though they have a well-known history for being a bit insane with knives and stabbing each other, the military culture of Bront is one based around respect, loyalty, and service, to the point where the Bronteian long knives are one of the most dependable guardsmen regiments in service to the Emperor to date. They are incredibly disciplined and almost never break unless at odds with the worst threats known to man. They have a culture based around the collective desire to serve, more so than any one section of the populace having any one desire for its own glory. It's why no matter where you recruit from Bront, whatever regiment, house, barracks, whatever you get from, they almost have the exact same ideals and know to work with each other, almost perfectly synchronized. One of the most recognizable aspects physically of the Bronteian long knives as a regiment is that all them boys and girls are covered from head to toe in some of the coolest looking scars a person can have. But suspiciously, almost never are these scars on the backs of these soldiers. There's a reason for this. Honor duels and non-lethal sword duels are incredibly important on this planet, where if any matter needs to be solved politically, they usually just pull out comedically large dueling swords, strip down to their skibbies, and then just start fighting until someone bleeds or gives up. I would also admit that they do attempt to give the other opponent the biggest possible scar. These scars that the Bronteians have are seen as marks of respect, just how tough you are to get through them, but only so in as they are on the front of the person. The backs of the Bronteians must never be scratched, as it's often seen as a sign of cowardice, fleeing the battle and receiving a mark from an enemy, or receiving the lash of one of your commanding officers for insubordination usually has dire consequences for the careers and lives of these individuals, as it is stated in lore that if a Bronteian bears a scar upon his back, they are usually never going to see many promotions unless their service is beyond exemplary, as once the shame is there, it's hard to remove it. As you could tell by the Bronteians, they do have a preference for melee combat, specializing in lightly armored, silent tactics of going in with as many swords as humanly possible, being strapped to their bodies and still being silent. The lightly armored point only really is there not because they want to be stealthy, but it's because they just want to be able to show off their sick-ass scars. Cool. Preferring to go hard in the paint when it comes to stabbing aliens and enemies to the Imperium to death, more so than having heavy armor, because I guess, tanks can't have scar tissue. Which, on that point, it's actually stated at several points in the rulebooks that they are from, because, the Bronteian long knives are one of those guardsmen regiment that probably existed somewhere in an obscure codex entry, but they're really expanded upon in the 40k tabletop RPGs, like Only War, which, by the way, Only War is awesome. It has a lot of the Maccabian Janissaries lore in it, too. That's where a lot of the Calexis sector shit comes from. And side note, this is also kind of a weird tangent to go on, but I don't know why this is true, but most 40k lore tubers I've met have a huge repository of, the 40k RPGs as well as the fantasy RPGs these in digital format for some reason. I think we all just got them in a humble bundle at some point, but I decrease. Yeah, they don't use heavy armor much, which I feel is more my shtick than using tanks. But as I was saying before I went off on that tangent, they actually do have some heavy armor divisions from their world, which I feel is likely because Scout Sentinels can have chainsaws attached to them with their little extendy arms, but I could also just be guessing. They don't use heavy armor, as I mentioned, and to be completely honest, that is 100% my thing. I know a lot of guard players tend to like using tanks and heavy armor a lot as, you know, you get to tank spam, but I like the idea of blobs of 20 dudes with nothing but 2 attacks hitting on 4s in melee and a dream running into Chaos Chosen to rip them apart like a bunch of ants attacking a spider. There really isn't much else to the Warriors of Bront. I quite enjoy this shit, involving them being basically just a bunch of mostly naked men and women running towards the enemy's dual-wielding sword. Huh. You ever just get so deep into like a setting or a subject that like the oddity of the situation never really hits you until like the last possible minute? Yeah, that just kind of happened because I just realized how actually insane what I just said was. Like, fellas, in a setting where you can have a near infinite ammo laser rifle that causes wounds that never heal, chainsaw swords that shred and leave injuries so hard to fix that it's better to just put the guy out of his misery and have the doctors deal with someone else, and tanks that have a firing output that would make most warships in our modern day a bit jealous. For some reason, the mostly naked armor of shaven, pale fellas that have a sword collection is still a respected, beloved, and dare I say weirdly efficient army regiment to throw at the sci-fi enemies of mankind. I guess when you're a big enough hammer, every problem is a nail and all that. Today we are talking about one of my favorite regiments. No bones about it. Pun intended, I guess. In the universe of Guardsmen, there are many different options, each with their own mentality, which is very important. See, the Armageddon Orc Hunters and the Catachan Jungle Fighters may be pretty similar in execution on the battlefield to, like, the Bronteian Long Knives, you know, up-close melee combat with weird brute force tactics and unpowered weapons, but the mentalities behind their plans is what changes them a bit. The Maccabian Janissaries and the Krieg are both death cults, obviously, but they both operate with a different idea behind their core fundamentals. So, why am I talking about this? Because in the Astra Militarum, I could say the phrase a Guardsman regiment focused almost entirely on militarized vehicles and heavy resiliency because they grew up on a shit planet, and that is going to bring up at least 30 different regiments to you as a person. But when it comes to the Valhallan Ice Warriors, their reasons and mentalities are what separates them from those other 29. I gotta say, just to get this out of the way, I love them, like, off rip, because it is currently winter as of writing and posting, and we got about 40 centimeters of snow over the last couple days, which blows, and after I record this, I'm going to go out and go buy ingredients for a stew. So, I identify with someone who hates the cold but chooses to live with it as best they can. So, who are the Valhallans, and why are they always so grumpy? Well, once upon a time, their home planet of Valhalla was a paradise world, lush, filled with beautiful greenery, and filled with enough good vibes to cure depression for most guardsmen. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans. By hurling a meteor made almost entirely of iron directly at their planet, that was at that size where it was basically going to obliterate all life on said planet. But instead of saying fuck that and leaving, they did the whole planet broke before the guard thing and decided to nut up or shut up, using their orbital defense lasers and every single bomb they could throw up into the sky to blast away the meteor into smaller enough pieces that it would basically burn up on the atmosphere, which is usually a terrible idea unless you can guarantee that it's going to do that, because then you just have a bunch of smaller meteors. But whatever, man, I don't know anything about physics. They were able to reduce its size enough that it wouldn't destroy the planet, but unfortunately the size of it was still about, you know, a mile in diameter, which struck the planet, which due to the weight of the meteor and the impact ended up shifting the planet from its orbit just a wee bit and caused a decrease in temperature very intensely, and it would gradually get worse and worse until, apocalypse conditions, thus leading to Valhalla being what we know it as now, a snowy shithole. Most of the farmland, the life in general, was destroyed. Luckily, the Valhallans had a lot of underground habs that eventually became entire hive cities, which is a cool idea. Just an all underground ant colony style shit. It's nice. Normally, this would lead to the entire planet dying, but no. The Valhallans decided to do something that in terms of mental health is actually quite healthy. They accepted what they lost and realized that they can't get it back. Then grow into the new circumstances and adapt to that. Sure, a shitty life where you subsist off of exclusively nutrient slime growing on the walls of the hive underground is kind of shitty, but have you considered how shitty it is being dead? So this kind of staunch denial of hardships causes the majority of the people in Valhalla to be the hardest fuckers in the universe, being so inured to their circumstances that they never break morale-wise under almost any threat of war. Because, by the way, did I mention that as their planet was gradually cooling down at a rapid pace, they were invaded by an orc war? Yeah, nothing unites a people together like having a horrendous enemy to deal with while your planet's slowly killing itself. And because the orcs are pretty up there as a uniquely horrible thing to deal with, they got really good at killing them. It's actually claimed that of all the factions in the setting, the Valhallan Ice Warriors are up there in like the top 10 of some of the, if not the best, orc killing specialists in the entire universe, which I remind you, this list includes mostly Space Marines, as the orcs are a bit of a contemptuous breed. They tend to make a lot of enemies. So I mind you even further, the Black Templars, Crimson Fists, Iron Snakes, Armageddon Orc Hunters are there, and yet the Valhallans get a particularly noteworthy entry on a lot of their lore to note how good they can kill greenskins. Yeah. Interesting. Regardless, they have shown such bravery and an almost inability to give a single f if someone next to them explodes. I mean, to be honest, all you gotta do is scrape that shit up and throw it in the corpse grinder, and boom, you have corpse starch. And they see corpse starch is actually quite a tasty snack in comparison to their normal slime. It's pretty intense what they put up with. Their mainstay tactics are pretty reasonable. I affectionately refer to this as the double tap method in terms of military strategy, which again, in terms of 40k, is significantly more reasonable than what you would usually expect. Again, I refer you to the Bronteian long knives, which fight using long swords, which, okay, cool. So what the Valhallans do is they launch an initial salvo of heavy bombardment artillery, manticores, basilisks, heavy missiles, the drill. Then, in tight formations of troops and quite a lot of battle tanks, they go in with bayonets and las rifles, also a bunch of Ministorum priests to head the charge to keep morale steady. As even on a godforsaken planet like Valhalla, they are good god-fearing people who believe it is the Emperor's will to have them be this way so that they can be stronger. But yeah, they rush in to clear out what was left after the bombardment. But most importantly, and the thing that they're most well known for above all else, is that they kind of fight to the last almost all the time, and also have added into their war gear that they have some of the best thermal lined coats in the Imperium. Oh, they also really like troop transports, battle tanks, and a bunch of other vehicles that they use in warfare, as it was trained into them during their many orc-based wars that the orcs like a good melee charge, so blasting away with a Lehman Rush Punisher tank is both funny and effective. Though I also like to have my own headcanon idea that they enjoy using vehicles a lot because they can leave the AC on and can finally be goddamn warm for once. The Valhallan Ice Warriors are one of my favorite regiments simply by virtue of them being so stubborn to the cold and shitty circumstances. They basically refuse to yield no matter what. They're the definition of that Viking phrase of they landed on the shores and burnt the boats behind them so they had no choice but to go forward. They don't look back on what was. They have faith in the world's ability to give them exactly what they need. And comically enough, stuff. Usually all they need is a warm coat, a good las gun, and a couple thousand orcs to kill, which, considering the current state of the universe, yeah, no, those are all pretty reasonable demands, all things considered. That's like 2 more things than Savlar's Chem dogs get, so, I mean, honestly, pretty reasonable. One of the things I think you'll find about me in this setting is I love oddity. A fun fact about ADHD is that novelty and staring at new things helps people to like things more and more, and it helps people keep focused on things. The more additions to a new topic that can be included, the better usually that topic turns out, and the longer lasting it is for a certain individual. I have a tendency to frolic about in new areas. I visit while dancing to unheard music, making all my friends nervous about if I had finally snapped. Meanwhile, I'm just happy to be included to the point of mania. So, new things, odd things, new and odd things make my brain buzz. So when it comes to regiments of guardsmen, the idea of oddity and a regiment comprised entirely of like 95% abhumans, so that's just fucking cool now, isn't it? So, this is what brings us to something I think about more often than you'd probably assume. Ogrins. Specifically, the especially talented Ogrins of the Orcan Stone Crushers. These lads are an almost entirely Ogrin-ran set of regiments from the planet of Orcus, which is named either by a nerd who played too much D&D or a nerd who likes Roman mythology. Either way, it's still a really high-gravity world to the point of being entirely populated by only Ogrins, and most people who aren't Ogrins die if they've been there for too long. The Orcans, which my script constantly wants to auto-correct into pecans, were a civilization in, you guessed it, the Calixus sector, which is where the only war the tabletop game takes place. Basically, it's where all the weird regiments I've been talking about tend to come from. They were on a planet where they had a very strong hunter-gatherer society, which gave them a bit more of a degree of intelligence, or rather coordination, than the big but dangerous babies that normal Ogrins are. They were kind of at the level of big but dangerous toddlers, which is why they are considered to actually be the smartest naturally occurring Ogrins out there. Now, don't think that means anything fancy, it literally does not, but in general, the Orcans lived on a planet where the beasts they had to hunt were very difficult to put down due to them also being Ogrinified by the gravity. So they had to work together and basically had this kind of hunter-gatherer caveman unga-bunga style where they would use sharpened stone axes to pulverize things to pieces. As the stories tend to go, the Imperium showed up, and with surprising levels of ease, they were able to add them to their lot, as they believed that the Emperor of Mankind was literally their dad, to some degree, not realizing that when he was referred to as the father of mankind, it's more of a, he assumes a patriarchal role and it's a metaphor, but no, they just kind of went with it. It did help, so here's where things get kind of cool. Due to Orcus being a high-gravity world, it led to it being used as a penal colony, because humans, or at least stock standard humans, couldn't exist there for long periods of time, and if they did, they would basically grow weaker and weaker as the gravity would slowly crush them. So it made it particularly hard for the most dangerous prisoners in the universe to escape said prison, especially when the prison guards were Ogrins. Where the jails were managed by these Ogrins, you also had the Ogrins being managed by Arbites, who would be stationed in these rotating orbiting vessels that would lead it so that when you were on shift, you were on planet, but when you were off shift, you were up in the orbiting vessel, because, you know, you're still human after all. The Ogrins, for about a century or two, would lead these penal colonies, but unfortunately, due to their overly trusting nature, the Orcans had the issue of being incredibly gullible. So, when the Severan Dominate arose, which were a secessionist force of individuals who were incredibly quick to lie to these poor sweet fellas, they fell for it pretty quick, saying that Duke Severus is actually the one who speaks for the Emperor, and they have been lied to their entire life. And and the Ogrins quickly realigned with the secessionists and retook the planet in their name. This was a bit of a big sad moment in the playbook of this planet because the Ogrins didn't know they were doing wrong. They thought that the separatists were there to tell them the truth, and they were just too gullible to see it otherwise. Even after the separatists ended up freeing the Penal colonies to use as free soldiers, the Orcans began to believe something was up, but they just couldn't scrape their brain cells enough to make a spark. Either way, it was during one of the major battles of this insurrection that the Ogrins saw a bunch of Ministorum priests speaking to the troops of the Imperium to rally them for one more fight, when a particularly smart Ogrin bonehead by the name of Brick, which that's a great name, but yeah, he realized that fuck, we done been duped, and thus using his brain, which is something you never really get to say for Ogrins, he was able to convince the Ogrins to fight back on the side of the Imperium, realizing their folly. Now after this, Orcus was taken back pretty quickly. Why? Well, it's a high gravity world. The people who were fighting on it were still people and would usually get crushed to death, so they couldn't fight for too long. Meanwhile, the Ogrins could. It's honestly pretty crazy how quick the fight was, considering the Orcans like using stone axes and all that. Regardless, the Orcans saved the planet from the Severan Dominate, and also due to their naivety, they were given leniency by the Imperium, being allowed to raise regiments of their own now, under the name of the Orcan Stone Crushers. Being eager to prove that they aren't traitors and earn the favor of their dad back, the Orcan Stone Crushers are known to be a little bit overly brutal in combat, especially when it comes to chaos or traitors of any kind. Seeing betrayal and lies as the worst sins a human could possibly commit, and which is kind of cute of them. Apparently they are relatively friendly to be around if you're an Imperial, and are the most disciplined regiment of Ogrins out there, likely from their decades as working as penal officers, keeping the Orcan prisoners in line. A fun fact about them is due to their propensity to fight like hunter-gatherers, they actually prefer not so much using the ranged weapons like the Ripper guns and other traditional firearms. They actually like using chipped stone axes of their homeworld, which are remarkably sharp and also very sturdy. I don't know much about the science of it, but I guess high gravity would mean there's just high density to these rocks, or at least a higher level of compression than you'd normally see. But they are able to use them at a level of skill that most other melee regiments would be a little bit nervous about. They do tend to also make throwing axes versions of this, as well as spears, which I do think is kind of a funny mental image. Imagine you're like a word-bearer Chaos Space Marine who's been around for like 10,000 years, chilling out in some bunker that you just took, and then boom, you get a 6-foot axe from some dude who can't comprehend the idea of tying his own shoes together, that he just threw it at you from about like half a kilometer away. God, I love Warhammer sometimes. Covering one of my favorites, the stinkiest of regiments. I want you to picture to yourself an idea of what if instead of shipping off the criminals of Australia to, well, Australia back in the day, you forced them to work in penal legions to fight for everything you wanted, rather than go back to the sun-baked asshole of the universe that is Australia. Shout out to the Newcastle Big Boy, the scariest thing God could put on this planet. But if you gave them carte blanche to basically steal whatever they wanted from wherever they were deployed, and it only half of the time led to you getting either court-martialed at the best and turned into literal nutrient paste at the worst, well, then you just have the Savlar Chem dogs, and they are just so fun. If ever I decided to play Guardsmen, I would play these idiots. I love them. They are basically the most bang-for-your-buck regiment of Guardsmen in the universe, as they barely get any training, get any equipment, and still somehow have a positive win-loss ratio. That's because Savlar, the planet they come from, yeah, it's pretty shitty, dare I say. It's actually in like the top 5 of the shittiest planets in the setting. It is quite literally so bad that one of the main punishments seen as worse than death for most chem dogs is to be sent back to Savlar. So once again, a shithole planet that makes weird rabid dog people. What is there to know about Savlar? Well, for one, it has like very little resources, but it is very rich in natural gas, basically chemical deposits that are very useful in, the production of weapons and items of great import to the Imperium. The worst shit to mine for. So the penal colonies there were sent to work on them, and this would lead to just the worst environment, as you can't collect all of the gas once it's mined, so you would need a gas mask to leave anywhere that wasn't completely filtered out. Thus, being outside without a gas mask is a death sentence. And it's actually become a bit of a way of life, to the point where not wearing a gas mask outside is seen as kind of just basically being naked. So yeah, so once you work in the fart mines for long enough, you kind of realize it's kind of shitty. It's a shitty life. But much like anything, once there was a firm discovery that they could in fact flock here to make a degree of money and marketability because of the, chemical resource, it led to the population swelling, and especially the population of prison inmates swelling, which led to riots, thinking, hey, we can take them. They can't stop all of us. Spoiler, most of the times they could, but the riots did suck because the world was made of poison. And that being said, all it would take would be a baton or a fist or a rock thrown at you at the right angle to knock your gas mask off, and then boom, death by poison. So they came up with a fun idea. Why not raise a regiment of the most violent and rabid guardsmen on this planet and deploy them on other fronts to get them out of our system? Literally. Genius, right? With their inherently violent nature, they ended up being equipped with not a lot. You know the meme from Halo where Sergeant Johnson basically says that everybody in his platoon right now was super lucky because back in the day his platoons were equipped with nothing but 2 sticks and a rock and they had to share the rock? Yeah, it's that, but like, for real. They usually don't get flak jackets, they don't get good rifles if they ever get rifles, and are sent into an area expecting them to die, and boy, do they. But the thing is, these are criminals who know how to fight with a level of rabid ferocity that would make most sane men a little unnerved, so that is to their benefit. Tactics be damned, they are going to bite you. But alongside that, there is one thing that a lot of people forget. These are fucking criminals. They don't care if getting caught doing illegal shit would send them to prison, because that's kind of their default. The only thing that is a deterrent is being sent back to Savlar. Getting shot doesn't matter. This leads to there being this kind of weird comedic disparity in the regiments of the Chem dogs, because half of the time they are either barely equipped to be dealing with anything, using sticks and rocks to beat up enemies, and the other half they are so well equipped because they stole from so many different guards regiments that they're better equipped than most other guards regiments in the history of 40k. This has led to many commanding officer being executed for not reining his men in, and also you can't really rein these guys in, so I guess there is a bit of a clemency you can give them there. They are basically a stick of dynamite. You need to light the fuse, throw them at a problem, and hope that when everything goes bang, nothing important disappeared afterwards. These guys are a great option for Underhive combat, as they are all criminals that are usually from Underhive gangs. They are able to occupy the exact opposite niche that the Catachan jungle fighters do, thus are used for very specific urban deployments, but are on the odd side of things. If they become too well equipped from looting Underhive habs, because as you probably could guess if you've ever played Necromunda, there's a lot of archaeotech down there just hidden away for some reason. They could also loot friendly military settlements, Tau corpses, orc traders. Well, if they get too many of this, then, well, they might end up being deployed on something that actually could be considered a normal traditional military deployment, which they usually get outclassed in, and then they just start from zero. But I will state, in these circumstances, by God, if they fight the Eldar Raider, they are going to kick that man so hard in the nuts that said Eldar will be severed from Slaaneish's connection forever. It's not anything more than just she feels guilty. It's more of a she who thirsts feels guilty for that level of pain, more so than lacking nudie bits forevermore. There's a few other interesting bits to know about the Savlar Chem dogs, and one of them is that they have an Ogren mounted division, which horrifies me that this is even an option. Where are my Ogrens riding Groks into battle, GW? I desire this. I want them
see them wear weird-ass armor and have fucking halberds. I just want Stoneclaw Raiders from AOS and 40k. Fucking sue me. But these Ogrins ride on massive Chem beasts, which are naturally able to filter out the toxins in the air because they were basically bred to survive the world of Savlar. So you have gas-masked Ogrins charging on top of these massive giant animals that have very loose descriptions to them to smash it to pieces before their shorter friends come in to steal whatever pieces are valuable and not nailed down. The veterans of the Chem Dogs ended up serving in the War for Armageddon, the third one, and because of that, the veterans of the Chem Dogs actually have the gas masks of people from Armageddon, which are said to actually be significantly better than the ones you get from Savlar, which makes sense because it's a shitty planet to live on. The weirdest thing about the Chem Dogs, other than all of that, is that they are actually very useful. I mean, yeah, they are annoying, but they get shit done. You don't gotta pay them, and you don't even really gotta care if they die, because this isn't the last chancers here. These dudes aren't the type that can be redeemed through military service. These are guys who modify their gas masks to inject them with some kind of chemical cocktail in the middle of combat that is only half of the time a combat sim that will help them, and the other half of the time it's probably just literally Fent. I have a bit of a confession to make here. I try my hardest to not come off like a contrarian in any way, but I do try to come off like I do have hard stance opinions, even if they do go against the grain of what is considered, you know, in vogue at the moment. Like, when I say I don't like something, I usually say as such because I genuinely just don't like something. I don't say it just to kind of guard my opinions or whatever. But I do often have people in my friend group get after me for being a bit of a contrarian when it comes to things that a lot of people like to do. So with that being said, yeah, Warhammer video games have never really inspired joy in me, with a few specific outliers. I like Total War Warhammer as a series. Dawn of War was fun, and yeah, everything else to my knowledge is just, it's not bad. It's just, I don't feel like I have an urge to jump back into it. I'm definitely more of a tabletop gamer than anything else, but I gotta say, thanks to a new friend in my midst, Froggy PhD, go sub to her, obviously, I played a bit more of Darktide recently, and I gotta admit, this game kind of f***ed. It's really good, and it was really fun actually taking a bite out of crime as an arbitrator and my dog Boots. So, in honor of this fact, I decided that video number 8 in the series is going to be about the main military force you fight in that game, the Moebian 6th, aka the Scabs, aka, oh fuck, that's a lot of lasguns being pointed at me, and why do I hear an Ogren? The Moebian 6th are a really fun regiment, as they are a part of the Moebians, which are in charge of fighting what is referred to as the Fringe Wars. See, in the Moebian domain, there is just this wall on the map, metaphorically, obviously, but it's the edge of the map itself. Outside of this area, the Imperium hasn't really established much of a foothold. Why? Because past this sort of dividing line, it's filled with a significantly higher margin of things that want us dead than usual. Not nearly to the tier of like the Ghoul stars or the worst parts of the Halo stars, but think every world is like a slightly scaled back version of Catachan, and you get kind of what I mean. That's just counting the Xenos races, because holy fucking moly, there is a lot of chaos funk abound as well. So, the Moebians, erected mostly on the central world of the Moebian domain, known as Atoma Prime, are sent to go fight this war, but the threat of those enemies is so overwhelmingly horrible, cosmic, and just plain scary that the Administratum made the executive decision to not tell the populace of most of the worlds in this domain about it. They simply referred to this as the Dark Tide in propaganda posters, and didn't really elaborate, so when the soldiers would return, they wouldn't really get much fanfare in general, because the civilians just didn't know anything about the campaign. Even minor incursions that people would go upon would be the equivalent of storming the beaches of Normandy, but this time there's also tigers with rabies everywhere. This is kind of how bad it was, so you just had a bunch of PTSD-ridden guardsmen coming back for people to be like, yeah, whatever, and they're not even allowed to talk about it because of the Administratum's rulings that it would go against the morale of the world. And I should state that when we're talking about minor guardsmen or minor incursions, this has nothing to do with the Moebian 6th, as they were considered the most capable of the regiments and were often the tip of the spear when fighting the ranks of whatever atrocity was in the fringes, or the dark tide, as it were. Day in and day out, they would fight these endless wars. They would lead to deaths, casualties, and when soldiers would get a brief reprieve, they were treated as having done almost nothing and not allowed to talk about it. So this is what we call, in the business, speed running the creation of a domestic terror cell governmental power abuse edition. Well, that was a lot wordier than I thought it would be. I don't know, we'll workshop that one, workshop one. Either way, they eventually would go on campaigns on diseased worlds that, although not 100% confirmed as of now, to my knowledge, it is pretty much confirmed, you know, if you have a brain, that they might have actually been a plague world of Nurgle. This leads to deaths, horrors, but also some of them kind of realizing that they have the ability to harness that shit. They could actually get some vengeance if they did. The words of Nurgle fed into their hatred, their self-doubt, and their despair, as Nurgle is wont to do, and they ended up becoming quite jaded. When you treat someone like a tool who is supposed to do something that has a high death rate and not give them any praise or honor or, I guess, fair enough pay, well, you can understand why they would be so fucked up as to decide to align themselves with the Plague God. Speaking of, on Atoma Prime at this point, there was a small Nurglite cult uprising in the lower hives of the central hive of Tertius, one of the main hive cities of Atoma Prime. The cult of I don't know why I'm having, that thing, the cult, I'm just gonna call it the cult. I'm bad at saying it, I'm tired. This is the last video I'm recording before I leave for Adepticon. I'm sorry. Okay, so the cult had cemented itself as a power to the people type of movement, at least until the zombies started to appear. And shut the fuck up. I know poxwalkers are not zombies. They are their own thing. Leave me alone. So in desperation, the administrators called back the Moebian 6th to deal with this cult, as they were the most capable of the regiments and could deal with it relatively quickly. Well, Grandpappy Nurgle works in mysterious ways, because you just accidentally got a cult obsessed with experimenting on people without their consent most times, who create abominations, demon house, and what have you, meeting up to team up with a secretly Nurgle-worshipping regiment of Guardsmen elite. Well, this was a recipe for disaster and cannibalism, so coming in and now teaming up with the people of Atoma Prime had not only not solved the Nurgle problem, they had made it worse by giving them advanced small unit tactics and military-grade equipment. Did I also mention they have Ogrins? Because they did. Yeah, this kind of sucks. Luckily for you, there is now the eyes of the Ordo Hereticus on this case, and they are sending in wave after wave of either weirdly lucky or swiftly dead recruits that are usually criminals to accomplish missions to destabilize the cult uprising, which, weirdly enough, has proven effective. Well, at least until the Death Guard probably arrive, as this place is basically becoming the ultimate plague city in the making. So, you know, all you need right now is just a single plague marine, and, well, good fucking luck, nerds. That shit ain't easy to deal with. I am doing a series covering Guardsmen regiments, special ones that are considered quite popular but not nearly talked about as much as I would like them to. So today we are going to talk about ones that I didn't really have a high opinion of until, weirdly enough, Adepticon 2026, but we'll get into this. Before I do, I gotta ask, you ever just want to mog everyone around you with how you're dressed? You ever just want to make them all feel inadequate and have every single one of them look at you with that kind of forlorn, wow, we could have been that were it not for our own imperfections? You ever just want to style all over the balls of everyone around you, even in the mud-slick pits of a horribly crowded zombie-infested city street? If you said yes to any of that, then A, you're probably a sociopath, and B, you are also probably a member of the Mordian Iron Guard, or would like to play them. Hailing from the half-and-half planet of Mordia, which is permanently baked on one side and permanently night on the other because of its rotational pattern, making it so that the entirety of the planet is basically just facing the sun all the time, it is, relatively speaking, a pretty shitty place to live, albeit not the worst. Think of it like Nostromo, if it wasn't really horrible all the time and people didn't think that crime was the only thing you could do. It is, however, still rife with gang warfare in the sprawling hives that exist there. See, there isn't much in the way of industry or specialized sectors. It's mostly just a hive world, but due to its odd creation, with it orbiting and only one side of the planet slowly being cooked half the time, it's pretty shitty. So gang life is very common, and the urban sprawl is something that a lot of violence just sort of naturally happens in. So with that in mind, there is this way to elevate yourself, and that is by joining the Mordian Iron Guard, whom have such a fun set of tactics to them. See, in order to be a full-fledged member, you need to get drilled, and then you need to get drilled again, and again, and again, and again, until a single word command is enough for you to basically have the orders memorized by heart. Discipline is beaten into them at such a level that it's stated that in lore, I don't think Mordians have ever broken in combat. They've never fled without being told to retreat by their superiors due to it being the tactically sound decision. They fight until they are told to retreat or until they die. They live and die by their orders. But the main tactic they are trained in is urban combat. You may look at them and think, ain't this funny? Isn't it weird that they are dressed in the bright blues and seem to just be a bit arrogant looking? Nah, dude, this is kind of an intimidation display. Think of it like how the Ultramarines don't use camouflage because they don't need to. Thus, sweeping street by street, the Mordians create these near breathtakingly perfectly executed fire lines that absolutely obliterate any ganger who would stand out of line. The Mordians, because of their training, maintain order above all else. They make sure all their weapons are maintained, their boots polished, the bayonets sharpened, and their uniforms pressed. This has led to a lot of people, especially Guardsmen regiments, unfamiliar with them, thinking that they're nothing more than a bunch of pompous, egotistical, arrogant braggarts, but it's genuinely could not be further from the truth. See, if you look past the uniform and all the bright and colorful things that they wear, you see the eyes of a man or woman who is basically dead inside. All that is left is duty, and oftentimes a broken body as well. They are caked in layers upon layers of scars, covered in aches and pains from constant warfare. Not many Mordians who live to old age look like a human being, more just like a pile of living scar tissue with a bunch of metal augmetics on them. And just because part of their regimental culture is to maintain their appearance in the face of the foe, doesn't mean they are weak or lacking in any way, shape, or form. It's often stated that they are outnumbered 1,000 to 1 on Mordia, and they still are seen as one of the most terrifying things to see in the streets of that hellscape. Preferring ranged combat and more civil combat than anything else, you could probably put it into words that they are one of the best, if not the best, at your typical urban warfare situations out there, though they do enjoy a good melee scrap every now and then, fancying themselves duelists of the highest caliber in some regards. The only one that I could probably say is competing with them in terms of cityscape warfare is weirdly enough on the opposite end of presentation spectrum, and that is the Chem dogs, as they are mostly hive gangers who would know how to use the streets to their advantage. I will add that being a Mordian means that you are on an upper class, a higher grade than your typical guardsman, but they do still have their weaknesses. See, in the field of city combat, block by block, they will take and hold, but it is often stated that they are kind of inadequate in regards to other forms of combat. They will still fight their hearts out, but say you have them on a jungle planet that needs help, sorry, they're not going to do as good as they could if they had clear lanes of fire and concrete beneath them. But yeah, also, the uniform isn't exactly good for situations like trenches where being covered in brown is actually the best idea to blend in. But yeah, I said that the thing that got me interested in the Mordians was actually something that happened at Adepticon, and it's kind of weird. Basically, while we were walking the halls, me and my group, someone actually approached us, and it turns out there there was a lot of people just going up and down the halls handing out con-exclusive miniatures, which makes me sad because a lot of those I would have liked. But someone did hand me a miniature, and it was from Victoria Miniatures. Now, if you don't know anything about Victoria Miniatures, they make some of the best Guardsmen miniatures I've ever seen. Third-party, 3D printed, not sponsored by them, I just really like their stuff. And this was one of their miniatures. This was their Adepticon 2026 exclusive miniature that they were basically giving out as a way to promote their product. It was a Mordian Iron Guard styled miniature, perfectly in scale with modern Astra Militarum minis, and it was made to look like Colonel Kilgore from Apocalypse Now, which is kind of awesome. I love that movie. I mean, who doesn't? It's actually one of the best movies ever made. I started to look into the Mordians after this, and I found out that that is really cool and also very accurate to their disposition. So, yeah, I put them on the list, bumped off one of the other factions that I had on there, and yeah, no joke, they weren't actually initially part of this list, which is kind of dope. The Mordians are basically the Iron Warriors of the Imperial Guard, but you probably shouldn't say that because I have this distinct feeling they really don't like that. But discipline, honor, strength, and iron kinda make up their entire philosophy. Just swap out city streets for trenches and you got yourself a decent match there. The best Guardsman regiment and one of the most requested regiments in the setting, at least by you fine folks. In terms of the Imperial Guard, there is this kind of standard of quality. Some regiments are just over-weaponized militia, and some are people who with nothing but a brick and 2 tin cans can annihilate an entire platoon of Tau stealth suits. When you have something specialized, like a pseudo-regiment of some sort, that is not just powerful, but almost elevated to the point of mythical figures, you kind of start to have to draw out comparisons. Like the difference between a Tempestus Scion, one of the most elite Guardsman regiments in the setting, and a standard Cadian trooper is kind of like the difference between a Space Marine Initiate Scout and a full-fledged veteran of the chapter. But we aren't talking about the Tempestus Scions today. We are talking about something different. Now, to follow the Space Marine analogy that I just used true to form, the difference between a Tempestus Scion and a Lucifer Black is the difference between a Space Marine and a Custodes, which is why today, my fine fellows, we are going to be discussing the Lucifer Blacks and giving a brief overview of their lore to cap off the series and make way for the next one. They are an odd faction because they barely even are one. To understand, it is a bit odd, but back in the day, and by back in the day, I mean so far in the past that Horus was not even a thing yet, there was the Unification Wars, bringing the many different people of the human realms together, using the Thunder Warriors, the Custodes, and what have you. The uniting of all of these cultures created what was essentially the first Guardsmen regiments. Now, they kind of functioned as we know them now, various different platoons under the same banner. These were the most valiant and most loyal of the armies that the Emperor had conquered and had pledged allegiance to him and were seen as incredibly useful. These were known as the Old 100, which is such a fun topic, but only just barely not relevant for today. I wish I could talk about them more, but pre-Old 100, there was a personal bodyguard army that not only served the Emperor, but served alongside the Custodes, and that is the Lucifer Blacks. The reason why they have such a different organizational structure is because instead of having full-fledged regiments that go to war, they deploy in super micromanaged kill teams that function similar to that of like a Death Watch kill team with just a large, small group by regimental standards, but 20 to 30 at the most of Lucifer Blacks with a commander up front who lead them to do some kind of assignment. They do deploy in smaller numbers than that in order to be bodyguards for specific political figures, but this is kind of why they stand out. They have just a completely different hierarchical structure. Now, the goals they were used mostly for initially, as I mentioned, was protecting the Imperial Palace alongside the Custodes, but also Imperial dignitaries. They were also very fucking good at this. As the big thing outside the weird organizational structure is they are a regiment of guardsmen populated entirely by overachieving fucking psychopaths. Unironically, they're one of the most uncaring, unthinking members of Imperial society. Even blanks get a little bit unnerved by them. I don't know how this happens, but they don't feel transhuman dread, which is an innate fear that is coded into our genetics to be afraid of Custodes, Primarchs, and Space Marines. They are trained to the point of being nothing more than a weapon with a sense of dignity and honor. And one more part of them is that they are equipped with the best gear the Imperium has to offer. Heavy carapace armor that can block shots from lasguns as if they weren't there. Hellguns, which is basically a lasgun that can do something. Specialized shock and power weapons like spears and knives. This doesn't really sell it, I know, but if you know anything about the Lucifer Blacks, one of their most endearing memes of how cool they are is that one Lucifer Black commanding officer was able to actually get a scratch on a Primarch, that being Alfarius. Like an actually decent wound. But unfortunately, what is lethal to most people is not to Primarchs. The thing that makes this impressive isn't that it was, a Primarch or whatever, but it was that it was a fucking human, unaugmented that much. This isn't a Custodes who was referred to as being able to fight a Primarch. I remind you, Alfarius allegedly, because we don't know if this was true or not, was able to sneak into the Palace of Terra, killing several Custodes in the process while he was completely unarmed and butt-ass naked. But for some reason, while he was prepared and fighting at full tilt, this human that was just at the pinnacle of training was able to injure him. Not horribly, and he still lost the fight, but it just goes to show how insanely skilled they are. Though, this does have to link back to 40k in its comedic way, but basically you have to acknowledge that 40k has an issue of things getting worse and worse over time, and the Lucifer Blacks are no exception to this rule. The inexorable march of time grinds away all things, and once the Horus Heresy was over, there was this kind of lull between the next major Xenos threats, and this led to the Lucifer Blacks kinda getting worse with time. To put it plainly, they just got rusty, without any real combat deployments. And being glorified guardians to the political diplomats of the world didn't really help them see much combat. They lost their sheen due to this, but over the centuries after things like the War of the Beast, they had kind of regained a lot of their former glory and went back to being one of the coolest and most trained guardsmen regiments out there. One last note before I go back to the Arthuring hole is they don't really have the highest numbers in terms of guardsmen. They are really, really small. There is a reason why they deploy in those smaller platoon sizes than regular regiments. This is specifically to preserve their numbers, but also they function better in these small cells that kind of function, well, I don't want to say ninjas, but they're basically just the ninjas of the Imperium. I feel like it's just kind of a reductionist thing to say that they're these elite, lightly armored, clad in all black, super stealth soldiers that have the best gear, but they're kind of just the Imperial ninjas. It's kind of lame when I say it like that, but whatever. They do have a sense of integrity. I know I said they're psychopaths, but that's just because when they're told to accomplish a task, it doesn't matter what it is, they'll do it no matter how much you cry for mercy. But they are loyal to the Imperium, not the Imperium's people. So it's very for the greater good of them, not in a Towie way. Basically, if they're working with a tyrannical noble, as long as that noble is working to further the goals of the Imperium and not just doing it for their own pride, they'll work with them. But if they find out that this person is doing something that is going to destroy sections of the Imperium just for their own greed or pride, they will just execute them, just back of the head kind of stuff. And that was 10 unique and fun Guardsmen regiments that I want desperately to be included in the game, but we know are probably never going to ever happen. A fun fact about me, actually. I'm going to be doing my own kind of mini regiment soon enough. I'm doing a Necromunda Ashways campaign once the hype for 11th edition dies down in my group, so I'll be throwing together a traitor guard group with a pseudo-military convoy of vehicles, a Taurox and the new Hippogriff, I think they're called. I love those little, flatback trucks. They're really cool. I want them to be somewhere between Slaanesh and Tzeentch with a blue armor tint to them. I'm just making Night Lords, but human, but I don't know. I think the disposition of unbridled unbridled cruelty would be kind of fun. But I do want your guys' suggestions going forward. I'll include your ideas because I think all of you guys can be kind of creative. So just to prove that you guys made it this far and prove that you guys actually are interested in this kind of stuff, let me know what I should theme these guys after outside of being blue and mean. Also, I'd like to hear ideas for names. The funniest ones, the better. I also kind of want to include Beastmen into their group because, fun fact, every miniature is a Necromunda miniature if you push hard enough. It's kind of a running joke with our community. So, yeah, thank you all for supporting me. Outside of that, special thanks to my channel members for sticking around this long. With your help, I am able to get all of this done, and you guys have been basically there by me for God knows how long at this point. I hope you enjoy it, and if you guys want to see more videos like this, especially early, and a lot of them that I'm not even ever going to show, like, I think by this time there should be a Q&A video going up next week-ish, if my timing is correct. I'm recording this a little bit in advance, but you know, then yeah, you can see that kind of video, which I will in fact not really go public with because it's not really that important for you guys to see it, and I want it to be a members only thing. So yeah, become a channel member, help us out here, and yeah, thank you all for your time. Thank you once again for watching. Until next time, just want to say, yeah, the Krieger's still mid at best. Steel Legion are always going to just mog the living hell out of them.